Welcome back, my friend. The lamps are lit, the wind has quieted, and somewhere in the shadows the Niffler has found something shiny again. But this time, it's not gold. It's a story, and tonight, he's ready to share it with you. So settle in and listen closely. It begins like this.
The Gryffindor common room on a damp November evening had a particular scent, a heady mixture of old, slightly singed tapestry, wet wool from freshly dried robes, and the comforting smoky aroma of the roaring fireplace. Outside the circular windows, the black lake was a sheet of churning pewter under the ceaseless rain. For Ron Weasley, sixth-year keeper and occasional savior of the wizarding world, the atmosphere was thick not with comfort, but with a specific, lingering metallic taste of defeat. He sat hunched over a small, wooden chest set in a shadowy corner, ignoring the easygoing banter of his housemates and the rustle of Hermione's relentless page-turning nearby. Ron wasn't playing against anyone. He was meticulously, almost savagely, reconstructing the last 5 moves of a match he had lost 2 nights prior. It wasn't the loss that gnawed at him. Ron had lost plenty of games. It was how he had lost. His opponent had been Adam Silk, a brilliant, if somewhat aloof, Ravenclaw from his year. Adam was known for 2 things, an unnerving dedication to his studies, and a chess style so academically precise it bordered on arrogance. Their match had been the culmination of a weeks-long rivalry, a battle of wits that had drawn a small but fervent crowd of spectators. Ron, the intuitive player, the one who often saw the feel of the board rather than the cold calculations, had cornered Adam. He had a clear path to victory, the kind of crushing endgame that left no room for doubt. Then, Adam had made the impossible move. It wasn't a move from any book Ron had ever read. It wasn't logical. It was a knight's move that didn't move a knight, but somehow inverted the entire logic of the board. The air had momentarily grown thick, and Ron distinctly remembered a faint smell of old, cold steel, a scent utterly out of place in the warm, wooden hall. Ron's king had been hopelessly checkmated just 2 moves later, forcing him to concede in utter bewilderment. "You've been staring at that rook for 20 minutes, Ron," Harry Potter remarked, closing a textbook with a heavy sigh that suggested he too was lost in a fog of advanced potions theory. "It's just a piece of wood, mate. Stop torturing yourself." "It's not the rook, Harry," Ron muttered, not looking up. He traced the wooden knight with his finger. "It was the position. He shouldn't have been able to win. I had the advantage. He did something wrong. But it worked. Perhaps he's just better at chess than you," Hermione suggested kindly, without looking up from ancient runes made easy. Ron's jaw tightened. "No, that's what he wanted me to think. That he's smarter. But this wasn't smart, Hermione. It was magical. It felt like cheating, but with the whole chessboard agreeing it was right." Ron felt an intuition rising from his gut, a fierce, protective instinct that usually only flared when his friends were in danger. This felt just as serious, but the danger was subtler, hidden beneath a veneer of intellectual superiority. The next morning, the metallic taste of doubt solidified into something real. At the breakfast table, a very unusual conversation was happening. Professor Flitwick was whispering worriedly to Professor McGonagall, who was uncharacteristically stirring her porridge without eating. "Adam Silk is missing, apparently," said Neville Longbottom, lowering his voice and leaning across the table towards the trio. "They haven't found him since the chess match 2 nights ago. His bed wasn't slept in." Ron's blood ran cold. "Missing. Just after making the impossible move." "See," Ron whispered, leaning closer to his friends. "I knew that game was unnatural. It wasn't just chess." Hermione frowned, finally putting down her spoon. "Ron, don't jump to conclusions. Ravenclaws often disappear for days when they're researching something obsessively in the restricted section. It's their way of studying." "2 days is a long time, Hermione," Ron countered. "Even for a bookworm." He spent the rest of the day in a state of suspended animation, his mind running endless scenarios. Adam hadn't just disappeared. Ron felt, with a chilling certainty, that he had been absorbed by the game. It was late afternoon, between charms and potions, when Ron found himself alone in a deserted corridor near the grand staircase. The light filtering through the tall windows was a weak, watery gray. A tall figure detached itself from the shadows. It was a Ravenclaw student Ron knew by reputation, if not personally, Elias Thorne. Thorne was Adam Silk's academic rival, a cold, intensely ambitious boy whose ambition bordered on ruthlessness. Thorne was known for his impeccable, almost mechanical logic. He was the kind of student who always looked freshly ironed, even after a duel. "We need to talk, Weasley," Elias Thorne stated, his voice a low, dry murmur that contained no trace of warmth. He didn't ask, he commanded. Ron stiffened. "I'm not interested in your house rivalry, Thorne. And I don't know where Adam is." "Oh, but you do in a way," Thorne said, his gray eyes piercing and utterly devoid of emotion like polished stones. He walked closer, and Ron instinctively felt for the wand tucked in his sleeve. "Adam was defeated not by you, but by the position. And you, Weasley, were the only other person to see the final diagram." Thorne then did something utterly unexpected. He pulled out a piece of old, metallic-smelling parchment. It was a sketch, hastily drawn, but undeniably clear. It was the final chessboard position of Ron's game against Adam Silk. "I know what you smelled," Thorne continued, his voice dropping further. "Old magic. This isn't a chess problem, Weasley. It's a Rune Matrix, disguised as an endgame etude. It's a map to the Mirror Towers." Ron's mind reeled. The Mirror Towers. Legends of a sealed-off section of the library, rumored to contain forbidden knowledge of pure logical magic. "Adam found the key," Thorne explained, his eyes glowing with a scholarly hunger that was almost terrifying. "But he made the one mistake no Ravenclaw should ever make, pride. He thought he could solve the final puzzle by himself, without relying on anyone else's unique skill. He failed, and now he's part of the game. What do you want?" Ron asked, his voice rough. He hated Thorne's cold, calculated manner, but the metallic diagram in Thorne's hand felt terrifyingly real. "Adam and I are rivals, but we share a love for knowledge," Thorne confessed, though it sounded more like a declaration of fact than a confession. Adam's endgame was flawed, based on a single incomplete inscription. The knight's move is not a move, but a choice. I have the translation of the full inscription, but I lack the intuition, the sheer, reckless Gryffindor boldness, to make the first, counterintuitive move that this matrix demands. Thorne looked at Ron, and for the first time, a flicker of something close to respect, but mostly cynical utility, crossed his face. "You, Weasley, are a natural strategist of chaos. You are the knight who sacrifices himself without hesitation for the larger game. You saw the illogical logic of the winning move. I need your instinct to open the path. You helped me rescue Adam and gain the knowledge he sought, and I will guarantee his safe return." Ron looked from the parchment to Thorne's impassive face. It was a bargain with the devil of intellect. He despised the Ravenclaw's arrogance, but the idea of leaving Adam trapped, a mere piece in a lethal puzzle, was unbearable. Ron knew, deep in his core, that this was not a job for Aurors or professors yet. This was his burden, his game. "If you lie to me, Thorne, I don't care how smart you are. I'll make sure you regret it," Ron said, his hand gripping his wand. Thorne merely nodded, a dry, almost imperceptible movement. "I deal in logic, Weasley, not emotion. Our mutual interest in the survival of the chess player is, for the moment, our only common ground. Take the diagram. Find the missing letter Adam missed. And I will find you when the time is right." Thorne vanished into the growing shadows as quickly as he had appeared, leaving Ron alone in the deserted corridor, clutching the cold, stiff parchment. On it, the final position of the lost game glared back at him, challenging him. Ron was no longer just a chess player. He was a knight on a board he didn't understand, forced to make a blind move in a deadly endgame. The game had truly begun. The morning arrived in the Gryffindor dormitory with unexpected speed, tearing through the remnants of a night filled with dreams of living chess pieces and cryptic diagrams. The light, though faint, pushed through the high, Gothic windows, drawing long, shimmering stripes on the stone floor. But for Ron Weasley, the morning brought neither freshness nor peace. He awoke with the same feeling of a frozen endgame that had gripped him since the previous evening. In his robe pocket lay the crumpled, metal-smelling parchment, silent confirmation that the preceding night had not been a figment of his tired imagination. Ron, as was his habit, ate breakfast quickly and carelessly, trying to ignore the worried glances of Harry and Hermione. His friends could sense the tension, but Ron could not, would not, and did not know how to explain his chess intuition to people who saw only books or outright malice. "You're oddly quiet today, Ron," Hermione observed, looking at him over the edge of the Daily Prophet. "Are you sure you shouldn't talk to Professor McGonagall about Adam Silk?" Ron bit into a piece of toast. "No, he's just bunking off. Ravenclaws sometimes do that when they need to think." It was a weak attempt at a joke, but he didn't even believe it himself. Harry leaned in closer. "Ron, he's been gone for 2 days. That's not thinking, Dot. Look, Harry, Ron lowered his voice, trying to quell the rising irritation. I know you see dark wizards and everything, but not all problems are another battle. Sometimes it's just a tangled situation. Give me time. I'll sort it out. Ron knew perfectly well that his words sounded selfish and careless. But he had already made his knight's move. He had trusted Elias Thorne. If he told Harry and Hermione about the agreement now, they would overwhelm him with criticism. You're trusting a Ravenclaw you barely know? You're going into a sealed section of the castle? You're refusing your friend's help. And they would be right, but they hadn't seen the diagram. They hadn't felt that cold, metallic odor of ancient magic that emanated from the parchment. This was his game, his endgame. He spent the day as if in a fog, avoiding his friend's eyes and barely managing the charm's lesson, where, instead of performing the complex weightlessness charm on a pile of textbooks, he accidentally applied a repelling charm to Hermione's desk. The textbooks tumbled, Hermione glared at him in annoyance, and Professor Flitwick merely chuckled discreetly, hiding his face in his sleeve. The mistake was strategic. Ron was so focused on the chess diagram that his wand responded to his internal pressure, not the verbal command. Finally, at 6 in the evening, he got what he had been waiting for. His owl, Errol, or one of Errol's relatives, brought him a tangled, old, clumsy knot, inside of which lay what looked like an ordinary stick. But it wasn't a stick. It was a piece of charcoal with a note. Mirror Tower. 5 o'clock. 7th floor. By the tapestry of the dancing trolls. Bring what you found. Do not be late. E.T. Elias Thorne. Ron felt his heart begin to pound. He always felt nervous before a Quidditch match, but this was different, a cold, strategic fear that precedes a decisive move. Precisely at 4:30, Ron was already on the 7th floor. The corridor was long, dimly lit, and smelled of damp, old stonework. The tapestry of the dancing trolls was easily recognizable. The ugly but amusing creatures had always seemed a strange choice of decor for a school of wizardry. Elias Thorne was already there. He wasn't reading or pacing. He was simply standing, his arms crossed over his chest, and his profile against the faint light looked strangely thin and colorless. He wasn't wearing his Ravenclaw scarf, just a plain black robe, making him seem even more detached. "You're on time, Weasley," Elias said, without turning his head. "I dislike tardiness. I assume you brought the key." Ron pulled the crumpled parchment from his pocket. "I brought the diagram, and you brought the knowledge." Elias finally turned. His gray eyes glinted in the darkness like two fragments of crystal. "Of course, the Mirror Tower isn't a tower in the literal sense. It's an enchanted section of the old library, sealed off after an incident in the 17th century. According to my research, it holds knowledge of the forgotten magic of movement." "Magic of movement?" Ron frowned, repeating the phrase. "Yes, magic that doesn't use a wand, but gestures, positions, and sequences to activate ancient charms. Something like a dance, or in our case, a chess match." Elias ran a finger over the diagram. "The entrance is encrypted here. This position is the coordinates. Each piece is a direction." Elias walked up to the tapestry and held out his hand. "The letter you missed, Weasley, is echo. It means that the action must replicate the movement. We must reproduce the key moves from this diagram to open the passage. As I understand it, this isn't just a chess problem, it's the choreography of a spell." "And you know what the move should be?" Ron asked, feeling a slight pang of suspicion. "I know what the move usually is in such studies, even when the position looks hopeless," Elias replied, his voice becoming subtly softer, almost enthusiastic. "It's always the knight's move, even if it looks suicidal." Elias began to explain how to decrypt the diagram, using the stones in the wall as chess squares. He pointed to an ancient, barely visible mosaic on the floor, hidden beneath the dirt, which, it turned out, was a chessboard. Ron listened carefully, and this is where his true advantage emerged. Elias saw formulae knowledge runes. Ron saw the game. He felt the rhythm of the chess pieces, their logic. And listening to Elias, he realized that the Ravenclaw had made a mistake. "Stop!" Ron raised his voice. "You can't put the knight on e6. Elias stopped and turned, surprise quickly turning to annoyance in his eyes. "Why not? It's the only logical move that opens the path for the rook and threatens the king." "Logical? Maybe for your books, Thorne, but not for the game. The white position, when you place the knight on e6, blocks your pawn. And the pawn is the only piece that can pass into the tower. The game isn't about winning the king, it's about advancing the pawn." Ron stepped closer and pointed his wand at a different spot on the mosaic. You must make the knights move to g5. It looks like a mistake because you lose control of the center, but it distracts the black king and allows the pawn to advance to h6. Remember the echo rune. It means we must repeat a faulty move to create the correct path. Elias stared at Ron with such intensity, as if seeing him for the first time. The student he considered merely a force to open doors had just corrected his brilliant intellect. A mixture of awe and anger flashed across the Ravenclaw's face. An interesting strategy, Weasley, Elias finally said. You see the logic of emotion. You see that to win, you sometimes have to provoke the opponent into a mistake. Very well. Your move. Ron felt the internal tension escalate, but he convinced himself his strategy was right. He raised his wand. This is the knight's move to g5, Ron said quietly, focusing all his will. Mundus movio. He directed a weak stream of magic at the g5 spot on the floor. In that very instant, the tapestry of the dancing trolls didn't just slide aside. It dissolved as if it had never been there. Behind it, a passage opened, leading not to an ordinary corridor, but to a long, spiral tunnel. The tunnel walls were covered in something that resembled frozen, dark glass. They were mirrored, but reflected nothing except the dim light of the torches. The mirror tower, Elias whispered, his eyes burning with greed. The entrance is found. I told you my knowledge was necessary. Your knowledge and my strategy, Ron corrected, trying not to lose the initiative. Adam Silk is somewhere here, and we're moving forward. The tunnel was cold and silent. They walked down, and the only sounds were their footsteps, which didn't echo off the walls but were absorbed by them. The runes indicate that every move leads to the next puzzle, Elias explained, moving quickly ahead. Adam must have gone deeper when his winning position suddenly turned against him. He fell into the trap of his own genius. The deeper they descended, the stronger the magic became. It was thick as honey and smelled of wet stone and forgotten time. They emerged into a spacious circular hall. In the center of the hall stood a large clock, but it was unusual. Instead of numbers, it had runic symbols, and instead of hands, there were enchanted chess pieces, a bishop and a rook. It's the riddle clock, Elias breathed out, his voice trembling with academic excitement. It only shows time when a riddle is solved. It should show us how much time is left before the trap closes. On the floor in front of the clock, a new chessboard was engraved. New pieces stood on it, all made of dark, smooth obsidian. Ron quickly surveyed the position. This was a middle game battle, much more complex than the first endgame. The riddle of the clock. To find Adam, they had to determine 2 consecutive moves that would create a frozen chess position. That meant no piece could move, and the game would become a draw. Elias began calculating rapidly, his fingers flying in the air, tracing imaginary lines. If I move the pawn to d5, it opens a path for the rook. But that doesn't stop the game, he whispered. Draw, draw. I must find the most passive move that causes no loss but gives no advantage. Ron wasn't looking at Elias. He was looking at the board. He noticed that the black king was in a position strangely similar to the corner he had cornered Adam Silk in their last match. This isn't just chess. It's a mirror of their game. Ron again felt that same cold strategic impulse. He looked at the bishop on the clock, which showed that time was running out fast. Thorne, Ron said, his voice cutting through the silence like a gunshot. You're looking for the smartest move again, but the game requires the most human. What do you mean? Elias, annoyed, lifted his head. Adam vanished because he refused to admit defeat. This riddle requires not victory, but acceptance of defeat. We must make a move that forces the game to end in a draw, even if we could win. Ron walked up to the board and lifted the white knight. We make a check that can be ignored. And then, instead of finishing off the king, we retreat the rook. It looks like absolute foolishness. A move that seems like a mistake, Ron explained, his gaze focused. We sacrifice the initiative for safety. Elias hesitated for a moment. But that means we won't get an advantage. We won't get the knowledge. It means we'll get Adam, Ron retorted. He made the first move, knight to f7. The obsidian black king automatically retreated. At the very same moment, the bishop hand on the clock slowed down. It worked. Ron made the second move. The rook retreated to h1. This was the move that guaranteed the draw. As soon as the rook took its place, the clock sparked. The runic symbols on it vanished, and it began to show ordinary time, 12 hours. Not just 12 hours, but midnight. Midnight, Elias gasped, his face pale. There are fewer than 24 hours left until the trap fully closes. We're running out of time. But Ron saw something else. On the marble wall, directly behind the clock, a new inscription appeared, engraved in glowing, fiery ink. It was the next clue. When the knight becomes the pawn again, in the mirror you see not yourself, but your choice. The descent to the forgotten king, through the jaw that speaks not. Find the laughter that is weary of itself. Elias was obsessed. The forgotten king? That must be some ancient wizard. And the jaw that speaks not, that's some statue or a gargoyle. The laughter that is weary of itself, Ron muttered, looking at the clue. It's about something that was supposed to be funny but stopped being so. A joke. Ron suddenly felt cold sweat. It's not the jaw, Ron said, looking at Elias with barely concealed horror. It's a gargoyle. The gargoyle at the entrance to Dumbledore's office? Elias shrugged. What a joke. No. An enchanted gargoyle that guards secrets. It's always forced to be silent so as not to reveal the mystery. And the oldest and saddest gargoyle, the one that has seen the most laughter, stands near the room of requirement. Ron felt the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. We need to find a forgotten gargoyle that doesn't laugh because it's tired of the jokes constantly being told. It must be an old magical guard that everyone has forgotten about. Elias Thorne stood motionless, his gray eyes now emitting pure, undisguised anger. His intellect had been defeated by the Gryffindor's intuition. I see you're not as simple as you seem, Weasley, Elias hissed. Your intuition is not knowledge. It's luck. It's strategy, Thorne, Ron answered firmly. I know how to see the non-obvious move. You look for the smartest solution. I look for the fastest. Ron was about to walk towards the exit, but Elias abruptly blocked his way. No, you will not go alone anymore, Elias said, his voice strained. You lead me to knowledge, but I no longer trust you with my mind. You are too unpredictable. You propose the deal yourself. You get the knowledge, I get Adam. Adam is in danger. Ron tried to go around him. Elias pulled out his wand. It was made of dark, almost black wood, and a faint, greenish light flickered at its tip. It wasn't Avada Kedavra, but it looked dangerous. The deal was when you were my pawn. Now you've become an uncontrolled knight. Elias took a step closer. We will continue. Together. You will solve the riddles, and I will ensure you don't stray from the goal. My goal, because the knowledge of the tower is more important than one lost Ravenclaw. Ron felt real fear. Not fear of a fight, but fear of betrayal. He had trusted a cold intellect that did not value human life. He understood that Elias could simply wait until Adam was found, then take the knowledge and leave them both trapped. I'm not your pawn, Ron drew his wand. No, you are my key, Elias smiled, and this smile was completely devoid of warmth. And now, let's return to the game, Weasley. I'm sure you'll find this weary gargoyle, because otherwise, you will become a sacrifice in the next move. Ron realized he couldn't defeat the Ravenclaw now, who was more experienced in duels and more cold-blooded. His wand slowly lowered. Fine, Thorne, Ron said, breathing heavily. Do you know what that's called in chess? When you force an opponent to make a move they don't want to. How? Elias asked. It's called Zugzwang, Ron replied. You're forcing me to play, but I will win this game. I will bypass your logic with my bravery. Elias didn't answer, merely gesturing for Ron to go ahead. They headed back towards the tunnel entrance, leaving the enchanted clock behind them. Ron walked first, his thoughts racing like frightened owls. He now had two adversaries, the enchanted trap and Elias Thorne, and he had to find the move that defeated them both. Laughter that is weary of itself. He was right. It was a forgotten gargoyle. Ron Weasley, who had never liked logic, had to use his unique logic of the game to save a person and outwit the smartest student at Hogwarts. And now that Elias had become his shadow, the game had become deadly. The next move had to be the winning one. They emerged from the mirror tower. The air in the Hogwarts corridors, usually infused with the smell of parchment and adventure, now felt stale and too ordinary to Ron. In his mind, the mechanical ticking of the riddle clock still echoed, counting down the last 12 hours until midnight. Elias Thorne walked a half-step behind. His wand, though concealed, was undoubtedly ready for action. His presence was like a dark, sharp corner in a room that allowed no relaxation. So, the laughter that is weary of itself, Elias hissed as they passed a portrait where a knight was flirting with a lady. If this is a gargoyle near the room of requirement, why did Adam Silk choose such complex, poetic wording? Because he's a Ravenclaw, Ron replied, barely containing the irritation caused by the occupier at his back. Adam loves to show off his intellect. He didn't just leave a clue, he left a riddle for the proud. Laughter, it's a joke. and jokes are his element. He mocks those who seek wisdom, not ridicule. They quicken their pace, ascending to the 7th floor. Ron, thanks to his many years of wandering with Harry and the twins, knew Hogwarts better than any map, better than any Ravenclaw. He knew where jokes gathered and where secrets hid. They stopped by a section of wall opposite the location of the Room of Requirement. There was nothing here but an old, cracked plant pot that seemed to have long forgotten what flowers were. "Where is it?" Elias asked, looking around tensely. "There's no gargoyle here." "It's where you least expect it." Ron approached the wall and began to walk slowly, concentrating. He thought about jokes that had gone stale, about a scream that had become a whisper, about laughter that had turned into exhaustion. Ron remembered a legend Fred had once told him, about the first attempt to charm a stone to laugh, and how that joke turned against the wizard. He whispered the necessary old word, which he remembered Fred using when trying to make a statue cry. It was a word meaning hidden mockery in ancient English. "Nothing. You lack the scientific approach, Weasley," Elias said, stepping forward, ready to seize the initiative. "You don't understand, Thorne. A joke is not science." Ron made another circuit, his gaze sweeping over the old, time-darkened brick. He thought of Peeves, of his endless, boring, but sometimes pointed ridicule. He recalled how Peeves once complained that no one laughed at his best joke anymore about Professor Binns. Ron, inspired by the memory of annoying laughter, whispered, "Lasterimo sempitern." It was his own, jocular variation on the theme of immortal laughter. The stone reacted, not with an explosion, but with a quiet, heavy sigh, as if someone who was deeply tired had finally given up. A section of the wall slid away, and behind it, in a small, dusty niche, stood the saddest gargoyle Ron had ever seen. It was made of dark granite, its wings were broken, and its face was frozen in a grimace of eternal, tragic boredom. The gargoyle did not speak, but clutched in its stone fist was a third chessboard, much smaller, carved into wood. It was the final position. On it stood a knight, directly in front of the king, defending it, and a pawn, which was about to queen. Ron felt his heart hammering. There weren't many pieces on the board: the black king, Adam, a black pawn, which was clearly trying to break free, and a white knight protecting it. But the knight was cornered, and its position looked hopeless. Beneath the board was the last message, engraved in tiny, hurried letters. The knight must become the pawn, for the pawn to become the king. Elias approached, his greed overcoming caution. He almost shoved Ron aside to see the puzzle. The knight must become the pawn. Elias's eyes darted rapidly. That means transfiguration. The knight is a piece that moves illogically. The pawn moves straight. We must transfigure the knight into a pawn so it can move straight and open the way. "No, Thorne," Ron said, his voice calm and menacing. "You don't understand. This isn't about magic. It's about the rules of the game. It's always about magic." Elias retorted furiously. "You can't just change the rules. This is knowledge, Weasley." "I will have it." Ron looked at the figure. The knight stood on the only square that blocked the fatal blow of the black pawn. "You can transfigure the knight, Thorne." Ron spoke slowly, every word measured. "You can make it a pawn. But in this position, if the knight becomes a pawn, it becomes less valuable and can simply be taken. It's not a move. It's a defeat." Ron remembered his first year. The Philosopher's Stone. The huge chessboard. His own sacrifice. The knight must become the pawn, for the pawn to become the king. He understood. The knight was him. The pawn was Adam Silk, who was trapped and needed to queen, i.e., survive and escape. "Thorne," Ron took a deep breath. "This is a metaphor. It's not a spell. It's a choice. The knight must become a sacrifice so the pawn can pass." Elias looked at him in disbelief. "A sacrifice? Are you planning to die, Weasley? For a Ravenclaw you barely know." "No." Ron felt the cold fear squeeze his chest again, but he smiled. "I'm just going to recreate a move I've already made. When I was 11, I sacrificed the knight so Harry could win the game. And by the way, it was the best move of my life." Ron felt the Gryffindor pride overcome the fear. "I won't die this time, but I will delay your king." Ron raised his wand and pointed it at the stone knight on the board. "We need to make a move that forces the knight piece to disappear, so the pawn can move on. But it must be a movement, not transfiguration." Ron closed his eyes, recalling the feel of magic in his bones. "Evanesco." Instead of vanishing, the stone knight on the chessboard tumbled off the table onto the floor. But it didn't shatter. When it hit the stone, it crumbled into 1,000 tiny, sparkling pieces that instantly disappeared. "What have you done?" Elias cried out, his face contorted with rage. I removed the knight from the game, Ron replied. I sacrificed it so the game could continue. At that very moment, the entire wall began to tremble. Another passage appeared, a narrow, tall entrance leading into complete darkness. Elias wasted no time on threats. He shoved Ron aside and lunged into the passage. The knowledge is mine, the Ravenclaw shouted, disappearing into the dark. Ron, recovering from the push, darted after him. He found himself in a space that glowed with a flickering, blue light. The walls here were mirrored, and they multiplied everything that came into view many times over. It was incredible. In the middle of the hall, on a small stone platform, lay Adam Silk. He was unconscious, his pale face covered in dust. Next to him, on a high pedestal, lay an old, voluminous folio, presumably the very one Adam had come for. Elias Thorne was already standing by the pedestal, his eyes fixed on the book. It wasn't just a folio. It was made of silvery, thin metal, and its cover glowed with an internal, cold light. I found it. I found the knowledge of the forgotten magic of movement. Elias stretched out his hand. Stop, Thorne! Ron shouted, but it was too late. The moment Elias's fingers touched the cover, magic exploded. No, it wasn't an explosion. It was a mirror reflection. The walls around them began to spit out energy, magical echoes of all the spells ever cast in this tower. They were charmed vortices of pure power. Elias only had time to gasp. Streams of energy struck him, tossing him about like a doll. It's the reflection trap. Elias cried out, trying to defend himself. Anyone who touches the book without understanding the consequences receives the echo of their own essence. Ron understood. Elias, who sought knowledge only for himself, received the echo of his egoism, magic returning to destroy him. Ron rushed to Adam. He knew the only way to stop this magical echo show was either to solve the final riddle, which was probably hidden within the book itself, or to neutralize the source of magic. Adam Silk was barely breathing. Ron knelt beside him, touching his cold hand. Adam, you have to wake up. Adam opened his eyes. They were clouded, but the fire of a chess player still smoldered in them. Weasley, he whispered. Draw impossible. Endgame. I know, Ron said, but I made the knight's move. I sacrificed the knight. Now it's your turn, pawn. Ron looked at the folio. It was too far away. The energy vortices were raging, and Ron knew that if he touched the book, he would receive his echo. What would it be? The echo of his complexes? His insecurity? He was afraid. The knight must become the pawn, for the pawn to become the king, Adam groaned. It's a grandmaster's move, not physical, a psychological move. Ron looked at the pedestal. It was made of mirrored stone. In the mirror, you see not yourself, but your choice, Ron quoted. Ron understood. They were both trapped. Elias by his greed. Adam by his pride. Ron looked at his reflection in the pedestal. He saw a boy in a worn robe, with messy hair. Not a hero, not an intellectual, but simply Ron Weasley. My choice is not knowledge and not pride. It is people. I'm here to save a friend. Ron stood up. He knew his next move would be the most difficult of his life. He had to outsmart the trap by playing against his own essence. This is my knight's move, Ron said, addressing not Thorne but the mirrors. He pulled out his wand. He wasn't going to strike the book. He was going to strike himself. Oculus Reparo. Ron uttered this spell, a simple, trivial charm he always used to fix Harry's glasses. He pointed his wand at his reflection in the pedestal. This was utterly illogical. A trap that reflects energy should not react to a minor, everyday charm. But it reacted. Instead of receiving the echo of his essence, which would likely have been the echo of insecurity or jealousy, Ron received the echo of the charm. Oculus Reparo. The echo of this spell hit him with a soft, warm flow, and it neutralized him. It was the echo of simplicity and friendship, the one thing in his soul that was least threatening. The energy vortices around Elias Thorne suddenly stopped. Elias, bruised and with his robe torn, stared at Ron, unable to comprehend what had happened. How did you do that?" he gasped. "Why weren't you destroyed?" "You used household magic. Because you seek knowledge, Thorne. And I seek the logic of the game," Ron replied, walking towards the folio. "You seek the most complicated answer. I seek the simplest one. The trap was designed for the ambitious and the proud, for those who would use the strongest magic. It couldn't reflect what poses no threat." Ron reached out his hand. He was safe now. He was the pawn who had passed the danger. He touched the silver folio. But instead of taking it, he did what a true knight must do. He leaned over Adam and directed the folio's energy towards him. It was healing magic, soft, golden. Ron had no intention of stealing Elias's knowledge. He intended to save a friend. Evanesco. Ron uttered the charm, directing it at the enchanted pedestal. The pedestal began to crumble, and the silver folio vanished. No! Elias screamed like a wounded beast. You destroyed it. You destroyed the knowledge. No, Thorne, Ron said, lifting Adam up. I just removed the main piece from the game. The game is over. A draw. Adam Silk, who had already recovered, stood up. He looked at Ron, then at the furious Elias. You sacrificed the knowledge? Adam asked, his voice weak. Did you think I would let you fall into a trap? I beat you yesterday. I couldn't let you lose today, Ron said, shaking his head. And, this isn't even the stupidest sacrifice I've made in my life. Remember when I, an 11-year-old idiot, sacrificed myself on a giant chessboard? Just a senseless knight who just sat there waiting to be taken. Well, this was better. At least I knew that this move was truly necessary. Elias Thorne stood motionless, his face white with rage. His only goal, his long-awaited knowledge, had disappeared, destroyed by simple Gryffindor instinct. You'll pay for this, Weasley, Elias promised, his voice trembling. I will outsmart you. Try it, Ron replied. But you missed the main point, Thorne. Chess isn't just logic. It's a human game. And you lost because you forgot about the human factor. He turned, supporting Adam. They left. Ron left Elias alone, surrounded by mirrors that reflected his powerless anger. The Ravenclaw, who sought knowledge, was left with nothing, blocked by the simplicity of a Gryffindor. As they stepped back into the Hogwarts corridors, Ron felt a huge weight lift from his shoulders. He didn't get applause, didn't get awards, but he had won a victory in the game that was his world. He was Ron Weasley, who had sacrificed himself again, but this time consciously and skillfully. Ron Weasley guided the still-shaking Adam Silk through the corridors of Hogwarts. Every step distanced them from the Mirror Tower and its trap. The charms that had held Adam were strong, but the healing touch of the folio was beginning to restore his strength. I can't believe it, Adam whispered, leaning on Ron's shoulder. I was so close. I almost found the key to the ancient magic. Your key led you into a trap, Adam. Ron spoke softly but firmly. You thought it was a game, but it was a test. A test of humility. And you failed it. They reached the 7th floor. Ron led Adam to a window where the bright October sun was pushing through the thick glass. The light felt soft and real after the blue flickering of the mirrored halls. You sacrificed the folio. Adam looked at Ron with an intensity Ron usually only saw in Harry when he was solving another riddle. You could have taken it. You could have left Elias, locked him in there. But you destroyed the knowledge. I didn't destroy the knowledge, Ron replied, carefully seating Adam on the windowsill. I destroyed the trap. The folio was enchanted. It wasn't just a source of knowledge, but a tool of control. It drew in the most ambitious and forced them to make an egoistic choice. It punished Elias for his greed, and it almost punished you for your pride. Ron recalled the last message on the stone gargoyle. When the knight becomes the pawn again, in the mirror you see not yourself, but your choice. The descent to the forgotten king, through the jaw that speaks not. Find the laughter that is weary of itself. The forgotten king, Ron muttered, looking out the window. It wasn't an ancient mage, Adam. It was the book itself. It was the king that waited for its pawn to become the knight. It demanded that you sacrifice your pride and ambition for the sake of the integrity of the game. And you couldn't do it. Adam was silent. His Ravenclaw intellect was rapidly analyzing the strategy and Ron's choice. It was at that moment that a quick, sharp clatter echoed down the corridor. Not footsteps, but a clatter, as if someone was rushing and hitting the floor with a stick. Elias Thorne, Ron hissed, quickly pulling out his wand. Elias rounded the corner. His face was distorted with animalistic rage. His robe hung on him in tatters, but his eyes glowed with a cold, pristine malice. You stole my victory, Weasley. Elias yelled. His voice was high and piercing. You didn't make a move. You simply flipped the board. You will gain nothing. No respect. No glory. I gained a friend. Ron stepped forward, shielding Adam. You fool. A draw in that game means defeat for everyone. Did you think I lost when you destroyed the folio? No. Elias laughed, and the laughter was dry and inhuman. The riddle clock didn't just point to midnight. It was the clock of Chronos. It slows down time for those in the Mirror Tower, to give them time to think. But when the source of knowledge disappears, time reasserts itself. In an hour, the whole tower will begin to collapse. and all the lost souls inside will break free. I came for Adam, so he could tell me where he hid the clue that would help stop the collapse. But you dim-witted Gryffindor, you destroyed the only way. Ron flinched. This was a strategic complication he hadn't foreseen. His knight's move had led to a trap larger than he expected. He had made a Gryffindor's mistake. He focused on rescue, not consequences. Elias raised his wand. Now you will give me the answer, or I'll make you regret not staying down there. Elias hissed. Confundus. Ron was ready. He wasn't the best duelist, but he was quick. Protego. His shield charm was somewhat clumsy, but it worked. Elias's spell ricocheted and hit the wall, making a portrait shriek in terror. You are cold, Thorne. You calculate too much, Ron shouted, stepping aside. Stupefy. Elias easily dodged the spell, which flew straight past him. You are predictable. The best move is always straightforward. You always attack head-on. Incendio. Elias directed a stream of fire at Ron. Ron jumped back, but the fire caught his robe. He had to quickly tear off the scorched piece of cloth. No, Thorne. Not the best move. Ron shifted his gaze to Adam, who was barely holding onto the windowsill. Adam, watching their fight, suddenly snapped back to full awareness. He was a chess player, and he understood the position. Ron, don't hit him, Adam yelled. Make the knights move to the corner. Square A8. Quick! Square A8. It was the farthest, darkest corner of the corridor, where there was never any light. It was an utterly pointless move in a duel. But Ron trusted his fellow chess player. He trusted the logic of the game. Ron Weasley, instead of attacking, rushed into the corner like a frightened rabbit. You surrender? Elias roared, rushing after him. You surrendered. I won. But as Elias Thorne ran towards the spot where Ron had just been, he stopped. Ron, pressed against the stone wall in corner A8, pointed his wand at nothing, at the empty, damp wall. Finite incantatum, Ron shouted. In the corner, something sparked. It was an invisible trap, masked as ordinary stonework. It was residual energy emanating from the mirror tower. Elias froze. His intellect failed him. He was so focused on defeating Ron that he ignored the possibility of a trap. Elias Thorne was a genius of logic, but he had never dealt with invisible danger. He always relied on knowledge. You knew. His voice was now only a hiss. I didn't know, Ron straightened up, but I knew you would pursue me. And I knew Adam, as a chess genius, sees the whole board. Square A8 is a defensive square that opens the path for the pawn. You look for the best move. I look for the safest. Adam Silk, meanwhile, taking advantage of Elias's distraction, drew his wand. Stupefy! Adam shouted. Elias, completely disoriented and emotionally exhausted, couldn't react in time. The red beam struck him in the chest. Elias Thorne fell onto the stone floor with a dull thump. An eerie silence descended around his fall. Ron and Adam stood, breathing heavily. The fight ended as quickly as it began. You're a knight, Adam smiled faintly. No, I'm a pawn, Ron nodded. I just know how to play so that the king wins. They brought Elias to McGonagall's office. Events unfolded quickly. McGonagall summoned Aurors. Elias Thorne was charged with attempted theft and illegal entry into an enchanted section of the castle. Adam Silk, as a victim, received no punishment, although he did get a severe warning about the dangers of excessive ambition. 2 days later, in the evening, Ron sat in the Gryffindor common room. Harry and Hermione, though worried by his silence and the scorched patch on his robe, didn't dare ask directly. They knew, whatever happened, it was Ron's own business. Finally, Hermione approached him and sat down nearby. Ron, she said quietly, Adam Silk told me you saved him. He said you found a move no one else could see, that you sacrificed the folio. Ron shrugged. It was dangerous there. The book was a trap, but you gave up something that could have brought you glory or power. She looked at him with a tender but watchful curiosity. Ron smiled. Glory? You know I'm not like you, Hermione. I don't seek logic or fame. I seek victory. He pulled out his old, worn pocket chess set. This game, it wasn't about knowledge. It was about choice. You can have the smartest move, but if you don't know how to see the piece that trusts you, you lose. I chose a friend. Hermione reached out and gently stroked his arm. You always knew that, Ron, she said. Even when you were a little boy who sacrificed the night so we could win. Back then, I was just an idiot following the rules, Ron admitted. But now I understand. The true knight's move isn't about a sudden attack. It's about a sacrifice that creates a path for those you love. He looked at his chess set. at the little wooden knight he had used as his key. "This was my game," Ron said, his voice sounding calm and confident. "I won, and I'm glad I didn't leave behind knowledge, but I left behind a friend." Hermione stood up. "You are a wonderful knight, Ron Weasley. Wonderful." She kissed him on the cheek and went to help Harry with his essay. Ron was left alone. He looked at the chessboard. The game was over. The endgame had been played, and he knew that the winner was not the one who knew more, but the one who cared more. He closed the chess set. The world of magic was full of knowledge, riddles, and dark corners, but he knew. His place was not among the wise, but among the brave. Ron Weasley was the king of his own game, and he was ready for the next move.